Good evening and welcome everybody to Behind the Mic for this Friday, May the 21st. I'm your host, Jonathan Hodgson, back with you for another conversation with a great sportscaster. Tonight, we're privileged to be joined by college baseball analyst, author, and former Major League Baseball player, Pat COMBS. Pat was a first-round pick of the Philadelphia Phillies in 1988, pitched 4 seasons in the major leagues, also won gold with Team USA at the '88 Olympics in Seoul, and has jumped into broadcasting as a college baseball analyst for Baylor University games, and also has done national work of college baseball on Fox Sports. We'll talk about his broadcasting experiences, all about his playing career, and also dive into his book, More Than the Score, and what prompted the decision to write that book, and get into a discussion about the state of youth sports and the atmosphere that is around youth sports right now. So many thanks for watching wherever you're tuned in from today. Just a reminder before we head to our first break and then bring in Pat on the other side, you can find all of our archives and live shows of Behind the Mic and all of our other ASTV shows at astvproductions.com. And we also simulcast all of our shows and game broadcasts on Facebook. And you can follow our further updates over on Twitter as well. So we're going to step aside, take a quick break, and we'll be right back on the other side with Pat COMBS. Thanks for watching here on Behind the Mic. And once again, welcome back to Behind the Mic here on ASTV Productions. Jonathan Hodgson with you, and joined now by our guest this week, Pat COMBS. Pat, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, Jonathan, what a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
And we were excited to get the chance to have this conversation with you. Your name came up a few weeks ago when we were interviewing C.T. Steckel, and your name came up as somebody that we would want to spend some time with. So we definitely appreciate you taking some time with us today.
My pleasure. It's great to be here. And yeah, CT's a great guy, and we've spent some time together here in the Dallas area. So glad he passed my name along.
So where are you joining us from today?
Actually, in West Palm Beach area. My son plays for the Miami Marlins. He's on the single A team here in Jupiter, and got a chance to see him play the last few days. And unfortunately, got hurt yesterday. Took a 95-mile-an-hour fastball off the back of his hand, and we just got word about 10 minutes ago that his hand is broke in a couple of spots, so he'll be out for a while. But yeah, we've had a great trip, just being able to see him and watch him, try to fulfill his dream as well.
And we look forward to talking a little bit more about that aspect of your baseball life now, of course, being a baseball dad to a professional baseball player. But we want to touch on a few different things here during the course of the show today. Of course, we're going to first dig into your playing career. A lot of great things to get into there. But of course, we also want to talk about your broadcast experience as a college baseball analyst, and then we'll get into your book to wrap up the day, More Than the Score, because I know that was a very important project for you. So we'll dive into before we dive into your playing career. You mentioned your son back in action in the minor leagues, and this year the minor leagues back in action after not being able to play last year due to COVID, and the major leagues is planning on getting the full 162 in this year. What are your general thoughts so far on on the major league season.
Yeah, Jonathan, it's great to see baseball back, and the fans back in the park as well. And it looks like things are going really well with all the COVID restrictions, even some now starting to be lifted. And I know in Texas, the Rangers have allowed 100% capacity since day one of the season. So from what I understand, it's going really well. The teams are doing a good job of monitoring and keeping the players safe. Of course, that's always a priority. You can't have baseball when you got sick players missing games. So it's great to see that they're obeying the protocols. For the majority of the players are doing that. The minor leagues have, I think they're in the same boat, except for the fact a lot of these young players have not played in a year and a half. So for some of them, it was almost 2 years without competition. And I think early on this season, you're kind of seeing a lot of the young players trying to shake off some of the rust. And, again, facing live competition for the first time, it's been a challenge here to start the minor league season. But not a happier bunch of young people than to get out there and start playing the game that they love and that they've had dreams about for a long time. It was just a crazy interruption. You never, of course, expected as a player to have to be down that long, but it's good to see the players back on the field.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that Major League Baseball did set up some things for their prospects in terms of alternate sites and things like that last year. But there's nothing to replace the minor league season. And from a fan standpoint, as you mentioned, it's nice to see the gradual return of fans south of the border. The Toronto Blue Jays are having their issues with the border there in Dunedin, and then later on Buffalo this season. But baseball's headed in the right direction. Wanted to talk about your playing career a little bit. Former first-round pick of the Philadelphia Phillies in the 1988 draft, pitched 4 seasons with the Phillies. Your son has recently gone through that draft process. What do you remember about your draft process, being the 11th overall pick in the draft in 88?
Yeah, well, it's it seems like a century ago when it occurred, but it was far different from the way it is today, Jonathan. So, back then in the 88 draft, there were a couple of things going on there. One was obviously the draft occurred in June. This year they pushed it back to July. There was not I would say the hoopla around the draft back then. It was mainly a team would draft you, they would call you, tell you what round they took you in, and that's as far as you knew, and the only thing that, preceded that was during the course of being scouted, you would recognize the scouts in the stands. They would often make contact with you. You may fill out a card for them to get some more background information, may take some type of personality profile. Even back then they were using those, but that was about it. And then, it was kind of secretive until the draft day. And you had an idea maybe what round you might fall into, but you really, there weren't the publications or the mock drafts or anything like that would project out. So it was almost totally secretive. And then the phone call would come. And the funny part of the phone call for me was I was sitting at home in my townhouse with my parents. They were both working that day. So I just sat around the phone as scouts would say, "Hey, we're going to call you at such and such hour to see if you're available, and we'll talk you through it." Had a couple of calls from scouts that said, "Hey, would you sign for this number or that number?" And then when the phone rang again, it was the Philadelphia Phillies saying I'd been drafted by them in the first round. And I couldn't really make out the voice on the other end too well. It was kind of a tough call to hear, and I really thought it was one of my buddies playing a joke on me. So we went back and forth for a few minutes, and finally I was convinced that it really was the Philadelphia Phillies drafted me in the first round. So that was kind of a funny sidebar deal with the draft. But then, fast forward to where my son got drafted in 2019. We actually take a family mission trip to Belize every year. We're trying to get baseball reestablished in that country. So we've taken a lot of equipment down to the country, and our family has all been engaged in doing camps and clinics the last 5 years, and it's going well. But we were down there in 19 during the draft, and I told my son to keep his phone on, that he might get a call. And of course we couldn't watch the draft board that morning because we were out doing a clinic. So we get to a restaurant around noon, and all of a sudden we get into range with our phones, and Casey's phone had a number of messages on it. Well, it was the scouts trying to call him to see what he would be willing to sign for. So fast forward 30 years later after I got drafted, and I told him, I said, you realize you almost missed out on the draft because we weren't in place to for you to receive a call. But the Marlins did call him and told him that they wanted to draft him, and they ended up doing that in the next few minutes. So we were in Belize, and it was really cool because as he got the call, he said, absolutely, I'll sign, and they draft him. And one of the coaches that we were doing the clinics with, there was a room full of about 20 coaches, and one of the coaches stood up and said, Casey, I hope you realize you're the first player that's ever been drafted from Belize. So that was a really cool story.
Oh, that's good stuff. And also in your draft year, you pitched for Team USA at the Seoul Olympics in '88, winning the gold medal. What stood out to you about that experience, and kind of walk us through a little bit of your experience from pitching at the Olympics?
Yeah, the Olympic Games, unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to pitch during the games, but being a part of that Olympic team was a huge highlight for me in my career. 2 summers in a row, I got to wear the USA across my chest, and obviously, Jonathan, no greater honor have I ever had than to represent my country for a couple of summers. And it was just an experience that just kind of gets emblazoned in your brain. Everywhere we went, every team that we played internationally was great baseball, great teams, great competition. Of course, even back then in the 87, 88 summers, a lot of teams were using their professional players at that time, and so America was one of the a few countries that would still use their amateurs. So, for example, we played Cuba in the World Games in '88 in Italy, and we ended up losing the gold medal game to them. That was just prior to the Olympic Games in Seoul. We actually left from Italy to go to Seoul, and some tremendous competition against that Cuban team. They were probably the best international team at that time because they were using their pro players. So here we were, 19, 20, 21-year-olds playing against their 27 to 32-year-olds that were they're all-stars from Cuba, and some incredible games. In fact, the last game went extra innings. We lost in extra innings there in Italy, but that really those 2 summers kind of set us up for the Olympic Games. Unfortunately, Cuba boycotted. So going into it, there were teams, Japan, Taiwan were very strong. Puerto Rico was strong. We were not considered a team that would medal in those 88 games. If you remember the 84 team in Los Angeles, that team was loaded. That team had Clark and Palmeiro and Bobby Thigpen. They were a team that was projected to win the gold. They actually won silver. And then we kind of came out of nowhere and won the gold medal in '88. Of course, beating Japan 5-3 in the gold medal game. So, tremendous celebration. Obviously, it was a huge honor to be a part of a team that won the first official gold medal in baseball for America. And, we still, obviously, a lot of great relationships developed with those teams. Jim Abbott, Andy Bennis, Charlie Nagy, some of the top pitchers on that team. Of course, some of the top position players that eventually played in the big leagues, like guys like Tina Martinez, Ed Sprague, Scott Service, who's now the manager for the Mariners. Great team, great talent. But, the really special part of that was playing for great coaches like Mark Marquis and the whole coaching staff were kind of the all-stars of college coaching at that time. And we just kind of played with a chip on our shoulder. No expectations to win the gold, but we thought we could do it. And it was just a really special team. It was a lot of fun.
And you played collegiately. You started at Rice University and then finished up with a couple of years at Baylor University, where you still call some games, as we alluded to earlier. How much did that time in college at Rice, and then particularly at Baylor, where you've been inducted into the Athletic Hall of Fame at Baylor, how much did that time there mean to you in your life and your career?
Yeah, those college years were huge for my development. There were a few teams when I was coming out of high school that looked to draft me as a senior in high school, and I just made the decision I wanted to go to college, and I needed to learn some things, really get polished up. I'd made the turn in velocity between my junior and senior year in high school, but I just still felt like there was a lot of development left to go there for me. So choosing the college route was a great decision. I went to Rice for 1 year. Then transferred to Baylor. At that time, it was the old Southwest Conference, and I was the first player to get an interconference transfer. But it really worked out great for me at Baylor. Came across an old pitching coach named Sid Hudson, and I say old just because he had played the big leagues with the old Washington Senators. He had coached at the professional level, and he was a scout for many years for the Washington Senators, who later became the Texas Rangers. And so a lot of the scouts that I had spoken to when I was coming out of high school said, if there's a chance for you to work with Sid Hudson, he'll really help you develop. And so I made the move to Baylor. Sid was a huge blessing for me. He just really was a guy I could trust. You know, he'd been around, seen it all, done it all in baseball, and really taught me not only the mechanical side of how to sharpen myself up and put myself in a good position to throw a baseball and to locate it really well, but it was mainly the mental side of the game where Sid really helped me to understand that part, you know, which was when you get to that professional level, that to me, Jonathan, is the real separator. It's the guys who have that mental toughness. It's really what goes on between the ears that determines how far you're going to rise within the game at that level. And for me, having Sid Hudson mentor me and teach me some things about that side of the game were a huge blessing and really prepared me for when I left Baylor. Not only was it playing great competition at the Olympic level and playing international competition that got me ready, but it was all the work that Sid and I would do in the off season and getting ready for a season, and of course negotiating through pitching in a really strong conference. So playing great competition that got me ready. And I got to the big leagues very quickly. So that just, again, a testament to some great coaching and mentoring along the way.
Yeah, and as you alluded to there in 1989, you made stops at single A, double A, triple A, and then ended up going 4-0 in 6 starts with the Phillies in 1989. Bit of a whirlwind year. It looks like being rising the entire minor league chain and having some success right away in the big leagues. What do you remember about that first year with the Phillies?
Yeah, I think you said it was a whirlwind year. You know, the expectation I had going in was I felt like I was ready for not the big leagues, but I felt like I was ready for professional baseball, as ready as you could be. You know, and it was interesting that, you know, when you get drafted, you don't control that. It's just whatever team chooses you. That's who you play for. And it was interesting. I got picked up by a team that was rebuilding, and they needed pitching at that time. That was their number one need. And so I really considered I was at the right place at the right time, and I was ready for it and prepared for moving up pretty quickly just because of the mentoring and the teaching I got from my college years. So when I got there, you know, I saw quickly how I could progress, and I just made a decision at the beginning of that summer, spring and summer in '89, that I wanted to get to the big leagues as quickly as possible. I felt like I could help the Phillies at that level as long as I was progressing and performing. And so I became the first player in Major League history to go A-ball, double-A, triple-A to the big leagues in my first professional year. And I think Andrew Jones from the Braves is the only other player to do that. So again, I got fast tracked, but that was not the plan. So I think it was probably late July. One of the pitching coaches that we call him the roving pitching coach, he kind of goes around the organization, but he had stopped in Reading, Pennsylvania that summer and told me that the plan was they were going to take me up to AAA in August just to see how I could handle AAA competition, and that would give the Phillies a good idea of whether they were going to start me at AAA or AA the next spring in 1990. And as it would happen, when I got to AAA, I threw a 1-hit shutout my first game, a 3-hit shutout my second game, and a 4-hit shutout my third game. So I guess I got their attention because the fourth game I pitched in AAA back in Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. The general manager of the Phillies came down and watched that game, and then afterwards, met with the manager at AAA, and they called me into the office, and we sat down, and the conversation went something like this. He said, "Well, I guess you're forcing my hand." And I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Well, we're going to bring you up to Philadelphia in September because of what you've done here at AAA here in the last few starts. So you basically kind of forced me into that situation." I said, "Well, I didn't mean to force you. I just really wanted to pitch well at this level and get a chance to pitch in the big leagues." He said, "Well, you're going to get it." So I got called up in September, and then things just kind of stayed consistent from when I got to AAA to all through the big league month in September. I had a great it was 6 starts in September. We won 4 out of the 6. I got 2 no decisions, but it just worked out great. I was throwing the ball well, locating well. It just really was a whirlwind there towards the end of that summer. So I set myself up again to stick with the team, with the major league team in 1990, and that's what happened.
In conversation with Pat Combs here on Behind the Mic. A couple of more questions before we take our first break here. I look at some of the names that were on those Phillies teams that you were a part of from 89 through 92. People like your catcher was Darren Dalton. Mitch Williams was in the bullpen. The Hall of Famer Mike Schmidt was there for a short time, I believe. Was there anything that stood out, any experience, any encounter, anything they left you with that you took from people like that?
Yeah, some great teammates in Philadelphia, and then there were some challenging times as well. It was kind of a crazy team back in the early '90s in Philadelphia. We had traded for Lenny Dykstra. We had traded for a couple of other key players that really set us up for that World Series run in '93. But yeah, it was, again, a lot of fun in the big leagues. That's, of course, every player's dream is to get there and then to try to stick and stay as long as you can. Unfortunately for me, the injuries got in the way in '93, or in '91, then '93. So I went through 2 seasons of trying to go through surgeries on my arm and the rehab and get back. But yeah, there was a couple of players that really had an impact on me. Of course, catcher Darren Dalton was a really strong leader. He was looked to on that team as the key leadership figure, and Dutch was a great guy. And then Mike Schmidt for a very short time. In fact, in spring training of '89 was when I got to first meet Schmitty, and of course you mentioned a Hall of Famer. So all the players, of course, looked up to him. Unfortunately, that would be his last year to play professionally, but that brief interaction with him was really, really a neat time for me as a young player coming in. And Mike had an effect on me just in a kind of a cool way. When the position players got to camp, they would come in about a week after the pitchers and catchers were already there. And the first Sunday that the position players came in, Schmitty said, "Hey, we've got chapel over in the media room just down around the corner from our locker room." And so I walked in there thinking that's what we were supposed to do on a Sunday. And of course, being at Baylor, we were exposed to chapel and things like that. That was mandatory back in that day. And but I hardly ever went. It was just not a big thing for me. But when the Hall of Famer says, "Hey, we've got chapel in the next building over," you tend to want to follow that guy. So I walk in, and that morning there was a local pastor from Clearwater Community Church who happened to be a Jewish convert. So he grew up in a Jewish home, but then became a Christian. And just the things that he was talking about that morning really resonated with me. And I had never made a decision to follow Christ. And so when he made that invitation at the end, I raised my hand, and then he and I began meeting and talking about my decision. And that led to him discipling me all the way through spring training. And so that was a pivot point in my life, a huge milestone for me to really, remove baseball as my God and put, Jesus Christ on the throne of my life. And that was a turning point in my life. I look back on that day and that time of spring training in 1989, and that totally changed the direction of my life.
And last one before we take our break here, you mentioned a moment ago that you first experienced some elbow trouble during the 1991 season, and 92 ended up being your last time in the major leagues, pitched in the Brewers system until 1995. How difficult was that process, having an injury shorten your career pretty quickly after it got off to that quick start?
Yeah, Jonathan, it's really difficult when you go through your whole life working hard and doing everything you can to control the destiny of your dream, which is for me to play in the big leagues, and then to see that get derailed by injury. It's difficult to go through that because it's the fear of the unknown. When it happens, when I first started getting the swelling in my elbow, I had a number of doctors tell me, "Hey, this is not a big deal. things like this occur. Then we got the x-rays back and saw a large bone spur in the back of my elbow. And of course, doctors are saying, hey, it's not a big deal. We'll go in and take it out. You'll be back to normal here in just a few weeks. I had the surgery, and it took about a year for my arm to heal up and come back. And it never quite came back the same way. Today, a surgery like that, you're probably looking at, 5 to 6 weeks of being down, and that's about it. And then back then, it just wasn't that way. It was a more invasive surgery, and it just never really got back on track. So I battled for the next 5 or 6 years trying to get it going again, up and down, minor leagues, big leagues, but just never came back the same way. So that definitely had something to do with the interruption of my career, but also never getting right back on track. So those things it's part of sports. It's part of what you deal with, but mentally, it can be really difficult as you're going through that. And then, as I talked about, my son, having a shot now to play ball with the Marlins and then having a broken hand yesterday, it's going to be probably 8 to 10 weeks before he can get back on the field. And I know, having gone through that, I know how difficult it is mentally. It's just like it's a shot or a kick in the gut. And then the guys that can recover from that kind of keep their head straight and can work through it and continue focusing on that goal, knowing that God has a plan. If you come across it from a faith perspective, that's where I had to go. And if I didn't have that faith back then, there's no telling, because my whole life at that time was tied to baseball. My identity was found in it. My joy was found in it. My wife would tell you, even back then, when I had a bad game, I would come home with it. It would take a couple of days to get over it. But that, getting back within my faith and knowing and trusting God that he had a plan for me, made a huge difference. And that's for my son. He's battling through that now. So we're going to pray with him. He knows, he knows what's important, because that's the thing when you talk about, your dreams and trying to fulfill them, and the things you talk about with your kids that you try to impart. I think the most important thing, Jonathan, is knowing that we're not in control of everything. And as an adult, it's easy to say that, because now I have a lot of experiences to look back on and say I was not in control of much. But for a young player, a young man like Casey, he has to learn that. And so there's going to be an interruption in his career, and he's going to rely on his faith to get him through it. He's going to be focused on getting back the best he can. It just hurts when you're going through that. Hurts when you see your kids going through that. But that's what I think, having something other than you're relying on yourself to fulfill your dreams, that's where the turning point for me came in my life. And so it's going to be fun walking him through that, even though it's difficult. It's going to be fun relaying back the experiences to say, hey, here's what you got to trust. Here's what you got to lean into, and you'll get through it. It's a blip on the radar in terms of your career and your life. And here's what you can learn from this. And if you keep the right focus, here's where it can take you.
Absolutely. Appreciate you sharing that. All right. We got to take our first break here on Behind the Mic on ASTV Productions. We'll be right back with a couple of more segments with Pat Combs. We'll talk about his broadcasting career and his book when we come back here on Behind the Mic. And back here on Behind the Mic on ASTV Productions, in conversation this week with Pat Combs, college baseball analyst, author, and former major league player. We want to dive into your broadcast experience here in our second segment. You've had several years experience now as an analyst in college baseball. Several years with teaming up with Dave Barnett at Fox Sports for college baseball. Now you're focusing this season, I believe, on Baylor University games. When and how did broadcasting start for you?
Yeah, Jonathan, it was I kind of fell into it. To be honest, it was a call that I got back in 2012. Ron Thulin, a friend of mine who has done basketball and football for Fox Sports for many years, in fact, a 35-year career. And Ron called me. He got assigned a baseball game. It was, in fact, it was there were two games that Fox was producing that weekend, so they had to bring somebody else in to do the other game. And he called me and said, "Hey, do you know any good baseball guys that can be a color analyst for a game? It's going to be a really cool game, Oklahoma versus Oklahoma State, the Bedlam series." And I said, "Well, Ron, let me give it some thought. I think maybe I know a couple of guys." He said, "Well, no, I was really calling to see if you were available." I said, "Well, Ron, I'm not a broadcaster. I don't even know how to do that." And he said, "Well, listen," he goes, "I've done it for a long time. I'll show you the ropes. It's just one game, but I'd love for you to come up and we'll just talk baseball. How about that?" I'm like, "Well, I can do that." So we did the game together, and at about the third inning, I think it was, we're in between innings, and Ron said, "Pull your headset off." And I took my headset off. He says, "Dude, you're a natural at this. Fox is going to call you after this game and ask you to do more games." I'm like, "Well, Ron, I don't even know what I'm doing, man." He goes, "Don't worry about it." He says, "You'll learn it as you go, but this is something you're really good at. You need to consider doing more games." And so, sure enough, about a week later, Fox called and said, "Hey, we want you to cover more Big 12 games and Conference USA games for us." At that time, Fox Sports regional network with Fox Sports Southwest, and then when I was doing the national games on FS1 a couple of years later there with Dave Barnett. And Dave and I had a great run together. It was a lot of fun, and so sad to see Fox get out of college baseball. Of course, ESPN has taken over the landscape there, but we had a great time, and I learned a lot. I had a great time doing it. And Jonathan, the way I looked at it from my perspective was, I love watching baseball. I love watching the college game, and I couldn't believe they were paying me to do it. I would have done it for free, but they paid me, so it was great. A lot of fun.
How much did you learn from those veteran play-by-play voices that you got to team up with, being the ex-player who's been on the field this whole life, and now you're throwing a headset on? How important were your play-by-play partners, and did you kind of feel like a rookie?
Yeah, I mean, first off, yeah, Ron Thulin was a great mentor in the business. We did the one game together. We did a couple of games after that, and he and I would always stay in touch. We would go over film and we'd review things that went well, things I could improve on. So Ron was tremendous. Dave is just the consummate professional. He did a lot of the major league games of the Texas Rangers, of course, called NBA basketball with the Dallas Mavericks. And Dave was just a guy who wanted things done right. And so you learn there's different. Just like any other job you have, there's different personalities you have to blend with. And then I've worked with guys that are tremendous in the business, guys like Brett Dolan used to do the Astros games, Tom Franklin, a guy in Houston that's known for doing college football, college baseball. So just some great veterans in the broadcast booth that really understand how to do it. And I think the biggest thing was for me learning how to broadcast was, they would tell what was going on, and that's their job. And then, like Ron said, you just stay in your lane and talk about the how and the why, because that's what people at home want to hear. They want to hear more an analyst viewpoint about why things are happening or how it's happening, and even setting things up to expect, right? So we would talk about when a team would shift or when they would do different setups depending on what we felt like the offense was trying to get accomplished in that inning. And then having a pitcher's perspective, Ron said that was the biggest thing that I brought to the table when he was doing games with me, where he says a lot of the guys he'd worked with before would come at it from a hitter's perspective. And he said what's really cool having a pitcher in the booth is that you're talking about pitch selection, pitch sequence, pitch count. You're talking about mechanics, why the pitcher may have pulled a pitch or why the ball spun and got hit out of the park. He says you're giving all those setups even before the hitter steps in the box. And he said that was really what was valuable to him, was hearing that kind of perspective. And of course, Barnett was great. He would just say, "Man, you just do what you do, and you just keep talking about the whys and the hows, and we're going to be fine." So he and I got along great. I stayed in my lane, he stayed in his, and we worked well together. But it's really fun when you get with different people, different personalities. You kind of learn. That's the important thing, right? Learning what they like to talk about, and then the play-by-play guys inviting you in, asking some great questions, to me makes for a great broadcast, because that's where people at home, they're watching on the screen. They get to see what's happening. You don't need to be talking about that. They're watching it. What they want to know is the behind the scenes stuff. What is the manager thinking? What kind of strategy are they going to employ here? When they're facing a great pitcher, what is the setup? What's the hitter trying to get accomplished here? They want to know all those things that make the game really fun to listen to.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that point about being able to bring the pitcher's perspective onto the broadcast. As a former player, do you have any thoughts on if there's certain positions for former players that make good broadcasters? Because we look at, obviously it's common to look at coaching and managing, and the amount of catchers there are as professional and big league managers. Does that same kind of thing translate into broadcasting as well?
Yeah, it certainly can, Jonathan. I think what's really interesting is from a player's perspective, it was just like when I was playing, you would come across these great players and you would ask them questions, and some of them really couldn't explain how or the process or what they were doing or what they were working on. They just knew to work on certain things, but they would go out there and put on great performances. And those guys would not make very good coaches after their careers, right? Then you get the guy who struggled, who wasn't really a great player, but became a great coach and a great manager because they knew how to explain things. They knew how to communicate. They knew the process they were trying to get accomplished and how to help a player get from here to there. It's the same thing in broadcasting. I've met a lot of guys that are really good at the game, but they didn't make the transition into broadcasting very well because they would talk about things that people were seeing on the screen, but they wouldn't give the insights. They didn't really know how to talk about those things. And so that to me makes for the greatest broadcast is you're bringing things into the home that people want to know about. That's the inside part of the game, but also how are players thinking about this? How are the coaches thinking? What strategies are they using? When a player misses when a hitter misses a pitch right down the middle, how did that happen? Or how do they take called strike three so they want to know the insights to the game. And so being able to talk about that and communicate that in a way where the listener can understand it, comprehend it. It's not over their head, but it's also not super simple. It's just, you're just explaining the game to them. Those are the things that really make for a great broadcast. And then being able to do setups. I love listening on football broadcasts to guys like Tony Romo and Troy Aikman. They're giving you the setup to a play and almost anticipation of what the offense or defense is going to do, what they're reading, what potentially could happen. And then to see it unfold right before your eyes, you go, wow, that was really cool to kind of get that insight before the play even happened. And so those are some of the things I try to bring to the broadcast.
And you mentioned before that you love the college game, being able to follow that level of it and broadcast that level of it. So it brings to mind something for myself, having broadcast in college summer league baseball for a long time, and for one season, the head coach, I say my head coach, but that's just the way I termed it when I was a broadcaster. My head coach for 1 year was Brian McCray, who played for 10 years in the big leagues, notably with the Royals. His dad was Hal McCray in the big leagues. And when he came in, I asked him, you've got all these former teammates who were coaching in pro baseball, managing in the big leagues, broadcasting in the big leagues. Why? I came at it positively, but the question was kind of like, why college baseball? And he shared that he liked being a part of that formative time in the athlete's career where he could really teach and mentor and really be a part of that next generation, because from his perspective, the dynamic is different from college and pro baseball. For you, broadcasting the college game, what is it that still grabs you about the college game?
Yeah, I love that you get like what Brian was talking about. You get the players that are hungry, that haven't reached the pinnacle of their sport. They're still climbing and trying and dealing with all the things that happen in the game, but they're doing it at a level where every one of them has that dream of getting to the next level. So it's to me, it's just an exciting game. It's fun. The players bring a lot of energy to the field. There's been times when I'm watching a major league game, it's like both teams are out there playing and playing the game, but there's just not a lot of energy there. And not all the time, but that's what you don't get that at the college level. At the college level, you've got some guys that are really getting after it, and they're busting it every play. You see guys at college level, you don't see guys jogging to first base. They're busting it down the line every play. Those are the things. That's the excitement and energy I love in a baseball game, and you get that at the college level.
That's a great point. All right, we got to step aside here for our next break. We'll be back on the other side with one more segment with Pat Combs here on Behind the Mic on ASTV Productions. And back here on Behind the Mic on ASTV Productions, Jonathan Hodgson with you, joined this week by Pat Combs, having a great time in the first two segments talking about your playing career and then transitioning that into broadcasting. And the third phase of your athletics life is you're now a published author of More Than the Score: How Parents and Coaches can cultivate virtue in young athletes. Where did the idea for writing a book come from?
Well, it's really the years of experience I've had coaching my three sons, and we've had a blast. My wife and I just made a decision, Jonathan, when we started having our kids, that if they were going to be athletically inclined, we wanted them to of course enjoy the game. Maybe not feel the pressures to perform, but just to have fun at the game and learn all those life skills and virtues that can be picked up from just playing youth sports. And we wanted them to experience that and to have a great time doing it. And so I just took the years that I had coached my sons, who are now 28, 26, and 24, and they all played collegiately. We've got one now playing professionally. But looking back, just the experiences that we had, both positive and some of the things that we would have done differently. And then now still coaching summer league baseball at elite level. I've got a group of 17 and 16-year-olds that we take and we tour around the country and just have a blast with these guys, really teaching about life skills as well as baseball skills. So those are the things I felt like were important, and the things that our kids learn. Even last night at dinner, my son Casey telling us, how much he enjoyed playing for me as a coach and learning the things he did. And he said, Dad, you would focus on us getting better at the game, and we would do the drills. We would do all the things we needed to do, but you really stressed the character side and the virtue side of what we can learn from sports and what that can teach us that will last us the rest of our lives. And so each of my sons, I think, have a similar story in that. And Jonathan, I think the other thing too is a lot of parents now, asking guys like me that have been through it as a player, but also as a coach, and then taking our own kids through it, what can we learn and how do we do this right? And today the youth sports is so different than back when I played. Back when I played, it was more kind of recreational league. Of course, you had Little League All-Stars. You may had some All-Star teams that played against each other that were pretty competitive. But today it's really the evolution of youth sports into this super club elite kind of level competition for those types of players is now accessible, as well as you still have the rec leagues, but there's so much more pressure on kids to perform today at these different levels. And so I just wanted to write a book that I felt would be helpful to parents who are now going through it. And really, what should our main focus be? What should our perspective be? And the first chapter deals with our why. Why are your kids in sports to begin with? And why are you as a parent putting your kids in sport? What do you want out of it? What's your goal for them? Then how do you be a parent that can be an asset and not a liability for your kids? And right now we're seeing a lot of parents who have become liabilities in their kids' youth sports careers because of their interjection, and they'll interject as a lawnmower parent or a helicopter parent who's trying to create that path for their kid to perform and exceed. And what I'm saying is, look, build into your child, right? Create the kid for the path, not the path of the kid. That's what's important. And when you talk about character, when you talk about life skills, when you talk about the things they're learning from the game, those are the things that are going to carry them on through the rest of their lives, not just the wins and the losses.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that come to mind when you talk about that in terms of youth sports. I know that there's many programs out there that are doing wonderful things in athlete development, and they've got it tied to the education aspect. There's a lot of places doing great things, but you do see some of these prestigious programs that like to get the tournament wins for their program, and the wins and losses become extremely important for that particular program. And what are your thoughts on placing that win and loss pressure on very young developing athletes?
Yeah, that's really the I think the chief question is, where, as parents, as coaches, where is our focus, right? Winning should be a byproduct of how we're teaching the game and how we're teaching them as young people. What are the things that we should be imparting on them that are going to help them beyond the game is where I come down on it. Because there's kids that have talent, and Jonathan, this just watching youth sports. There's going to be kids that excel and exceed, and they've just been given God-given gifts that some other kids don't have. And so for those kids, there is a place, at those elite levels, those club levels, that's where they should be playing. But there's a pressure for kids that don't have that level of talent to play up and try to exceed, I think, the expectations that their talent provides for them. And that's where, as parents, as coaches, we need to recognize that, and that regardless of what talent level your child has, there's so much they can gain from the game if we'll allow it to happen, and if we don't get in the way of that, and so that's my mission and focus, is to help parents, figure out the why, have the right perspective, do the proper vetting, get your kids into the right program, get them with the right coaches. There's some coaches that are really doing things right, as you talked about, that are in it for all the right reasons. There's other coaches that are in it for own personal gain. And we see that at every level, right? The money now that's flowing through youth sports and some of these select organizations, they're all about the money. You do the proper vetting of that. But I would say the biggest thing is put your kid into the frame of mind of they're going to win if they learn the right things. And to me, it's really the character development, the life skills that are most important. And when our kids, give you an example, when our kids would, they all played competitive sports, they played elite level type sports, but our focus as parents, even on games that they lost or they didn't perform well in, we just wanted them to learn from that, and we would ask those questions. Hey, Connor, what did you learn from that experience? Or what did you learn from that loss today? And how do you get better from this? And what about when that other team started arguing with the umpire? How'd you view that? How'd that make you feel? Right. So using the game to teach those life lessons is huge. And that's where I think kids who come through youth sports have a competitive advantage in life, because now they've been with teams. They learn how to play a team game. They learn that it's not about them, that they have to sometimes sacrifice themselves for the betterment of the team. If the kids are going through, individual sports like golf or tennis, there's still plenty to learn in terms of how to be a great teammate, how to be a hard worker, how to develop that work ethic that I think in a lot of kids today is missing, right? And that, to me, that youth sports teaches you how not to be entitled. And I think that's the beauty of the game, where you're seeing some young kids really struggle in some different areas. That's where I think youth sports can really teach a lot of virtue and positives that the kids will learn and carry with them through their college days and through their professional days.
And I think that's so important when you're talking about getting kids to focus on the right things, on the takeaways, on the lessons so that they can learn. Because I'll use the reference that's closest to me right now, doing this show from Canada, is of course hockey, and the atmosphere around a minor hockey rink is volatile a lot of times.
Right.
And it's parents putting pressure on their kids. It's getting vocal at their kids during games. It's yelling at the refs. It's assaults on the officials. And I've done work with sports officials before. So I've kind of come into their world on it too. But all those kind of things are just instilling the wrong messages and putting the wrong takeaways in these kids' minds. So as you've kind of talked about already, the parents have a leading role in what their kids, kids at that, especially at the younger ages, are impressionable.
Right.
So how we guide them is so important.
Yeah, Jonathan, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. In some ways, the game has gotten out of control. And I think it's really a lack of accountability. And listen, my wife would elbow me in the side too. You get a tight game, you're in the middle of it. And even as a coach, I gave my assistant coaches permission to hold me accountable. When my voice got too loud, or if I started to get on an umpire for whatever reason, I wanted those guys to say, time out. Hey, don't cross that line, right? So again, giving permission for people around you to hold you accountable to that, because we all get caught up in the moment, but we can't allow that to keep happening, right? And we've got to hold each other accountable in that. That's the beauty of our Constitution. We talk about norming behavior in our society. We've allowed these things to creep in, and now it's become predominant in a lot of situations. And you'll love this story. My oldest son is a hockey player and played hockey all the way through college, and then helped build a hockey program at a D3 school that now went to their national championships just 4 years into the program. So my son's been around hockey his whole life, and that was a game I didn't really understand as much. I was a chaplain for the Houston Aeros hockey team for about a dozen years after my baseball career, and my oldest son just fell in love with the game. And so we would hear some of those same things at the hockey arenas. And sometimes it's just having a conversation with people that makes a difference. I would walk up. There was a particular parent when my son played hockey, and I would just stand there and talk to him. I'm like, hey, man, how do you think your kid feels when you're yelling at him, for 3 quarters? And he would look at me like, well, I mean, why are you talking to me? I'm saying, well, look, I played professionally and been through it all, but look, I just don't think it's helpful when your kid hears your voice every time he makes a mistake. You're lighting him up for it, and I just see his performance go down every game when you start into that. I said, are you not seeing that? But just having that conversation, right? And it was not offensive. I wasn't trying to offend the guy. We were just having a simple conversation about that, about what I was seeing with his own kid. And what was really cool was his wife came up to me a few weeks later and said, just you talking to Dave really helped him to understand that he can now finally see when he was getting on his son, it was really causing some performance issues. I said, well, look, hey, our kids are already anxious when they jump on that ice, man. Whenever they hear stuff, those verbal jabs coming at them, I know how my kids feel when they get it. They've told me, Dad, you're not helping me when you get on me after a tough play, right? So I think just having those conversations is really key. And we talk about that in the book. More than the score really is, what's the most important thing we can teach our kids, model for our kids? And to me, Jonathan, it's a behavioral side, right? We all have constraints. We all have behavioral issues that we're not great at. To me, the openness that I have with people around me is, hey, when you see me messing up, would you please tell me? Because sometimes I don't recognize it or I'm not aware. So would you just let me know that I'm being an idiot, right? But having that accountability, I think is key for us to change the game in youth sports. We need that. And I'd hate for leagues to have these no tolerance policies that if you yell at an umpire, they have to kick you out of the ballpark. We're all there to watch our kids play and perform, but we got to be smart about it and do the right things, model the right behaviors that we want our kids to have when they get out of the house.
And Pat, as we get you out of here, I'll just toss one or two quick hitters at you. As we've talked about a lot of different aspects of your career in baseball and in sports. Is there anything that you can look back on now and say, you know what, I'm pretty proud of that? Is there anything that you're most proud of that you've done in your life in sports?
Well, gosh, Jonathan, there could be a dozen things I could point to. I would say the biggest thing that comes to mind when you're asking me that question is my wife and I, just the relationship that we had with our sons, raising them up in the game. My professional baseball career was a blip. It lasted, 8 years. And I look back on very, very appreciative of that, very, very fond of the time that I had at that level, grateful for it. But, what was most important for me was marrying the right woman, who was willing to help me to grow, to get better, to sharpen me as a husband, as a dad. That's the part I'm most grateful for, is having a wife who was willing to help me, and vice versa, right? We grow together, we grow with each other, and then to raise three really good sons. You know, they've all had their mistakes. They made their mistakes in high school and did some stupid stuff in college, but they didn't make major mistakes. And I think just having that family atmosphere that we could talk about things, we could work through them together. They knew they could come to us with anything, that nothing was off the table, that there was always grace and forgiveness at home with accountability. You know, we would talk through things. We didn't want them to continue making the same mistakes. So sometimes we'd have to bring in some consequences and some accountability. But for my wife and I to be able to work through that together, we were a team. And our kids now at the ages that they're at, they are so thankful that their mom and dad did things the way we did in parenting. And look, we weren't the perfect parents. We made plenty of mistakes. Those are in the book too. But I think we did enough right things that they understood that they're an important part of our legacy and what we're trying to impart with them. And that was, I think, the thing I look back on that I'm most proud of, just being a great dad and trying to make adjustments along the way with my wife.
All right. Well, the book is More Than the Score: How Parents and Coaches Can Cultivate Virtue in Youth Athletes. And you can also find Pat on Baylor University broadcast. Pat, where can we find Baylor broadcasts?
Yeah, it's ESPN Plus. They're doing all the regional games now. So I've got one more series against Oklahoma this week, Baylor and OU Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Then we enter the Big 12 tournament. The following week, I'll be doing ESPN radio for the Big 12 tournament. So, if you're a Big 12 college baseball fan, come see us.
We'll check you out for sure. All right, Pat, we'll let you go. But thanks so much for spending an hour with us here tonight. We really appreciate it. It was a fun chat and learned a lot as well. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Jonathan. What a pleasure and honor to be with you. I appreciate the invitation. Thanks.
Appreciate it. All right, we'll go to one more break here on Behind the Mic, and we'll be back. I'll be back to wrap it up for another week here on ASTV Productions. And once again, welcome back to Behind the Mic here on ASTV Productions, wrapping up the show for another week. Honored to be joined this week for a chat with Pat COMBS, former Major League Baseball pitcher with the Philadelphia Phillies, Olympic gold medalist with Team USA in 1988, broadcaster in a couple of different spots with ESPN Plus, formerly with Fox Sports, college baseball analyst in the Big 12, and of course, author of More Than the Score. Great wide-ranging conversation with Pat here this evening, talking about his playing career, his broadcasting career, and his focus on improving the atmosphere around youth sports. Once again, thanks so much to Pat COMBS for joining us. And if you missed any part of this show, or you want to go back and watch any of our archives from past shows, you can log on to astvproductions.com. That's where you'll find all of the old Behind the Mics, as well as all of our other shows here at ASTV, as well as our live game broadcasts. We also simulcast on Facebook, and you can follow our updates on Twitter as well. So that'll do it for another week on Behind the Mic. Thanks so much for tuning us in wherever you've been watching from. We appreciate you making us part of your Friday night. So until next week, same time, same place, 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern next Friday. I'm Jonathan Hodgson, and for my guest, Pat COMBS, thanks for watching Behind the Mic.